So now looking at units I'm not actually expecting, though I'd still like to talk about because there's a chance, and I've been wrong before, let's go ahead and talk about the big blind dinosaur in the room, the Troglodon. So I cannot give you a legit reason why the Troglodon is not going to be in. I don't have anything like that. The only thing that occurs to me is that he's kind of unique looking. Like he shares a lot of similar assets with the Carnosaur, but he has like a totally different head, totally different tail. He has like a spit animation, which is going to be completely unique to him and him alone. And whenever there's something that has totally unique animations that CA won't be able to recycle for other models, then you know it's one of those things that it's going to be slow in the coming. Like, we'll probably get it eventually, but it might take a while, like the Bone Giant or Jabber's Life. But, there are... So, granted, because this is a main game faction, there's always a possibility we could get another Lizardmen DLC in the future that might see these units. But the Troglodon to me really feels like a unit that, although he fits very nicely with the Cult of Sotek because it's a Sotek themed monster, it's basically this giant... So for anyone that's not aware of what a Troglodon is, I should probably explain that. A Troglodon is this big, white, blind dinosaur, and it's known as like the White Death to the Lizardmen, because even the Lizardmen are scared of this thing, because they are very temperamental, they're not nice, and they have this horrible acid spit that you'll see in some of the models that I'll be showing down below. You can kind of see it hawking a loogie. And what that spit does is they have these long horns that come out of their nostrils, and they basically use these to enhance their sense of smell and also detect vibrations. Those big horns coming out of their noses are essentially like they're like rods that just pick up movement, and they're very, very good at detecting something moving around, to the extent that they are basically like snipers as far as big dinosaurs go. They are very, very quick, but at like noticing something and just immediately firing. And what they do is they spit these big lines of acid that, if they hit you, it's very corrosive and starts immediately and painfully eating its way through your flesh to get down into your nerve endings and just cause you unbearable agony. And the reason it does that is because once it starts causing you so much pain, most people and creatures start screaming or making lots of noise as they're thrashing around in agony. And that's how the Troglodon knows where you are. And then it comes after you and it eats your face off. And the Troglodon is not a slouch in combat. It's very, very venomous and poisonous. It has poisoned attacks. It has poisonous spit. It's very, very deadly. And basically, its spit is so corrosive and deadly that although it doesn't hit quite as hard, it has the same effect against large creatures that the bite of a Carnosaur does. So it basically would have an anti-large spitting attack that would do poison, so it would slow people down and probably provide a buff. And it's a fairly good fighter. It's nowhere near as good at fighting as like a Carnosaur. It's much more designed to like slow you down and hurt you with poison by spitting on you, and then it approaches carefully and just like tears your face off. They have skink oracles on their backs, so they have skink riders instead of saurus riders, which also lowers their combat ability a little bit, but the skink rider makes up for it in that he can help generate winds of magic, and he can shoot off fireballs through like Arcane Vassal. The Troglodon is aquatic, which is very, very spooky on a big monster, because it means he gets a lot of buffs when he goes into the water instead of just ignoring debuffs. On top of that, it's very fast. It's the fastest of the Lizardmen dinosaurs. It can haul butt across most forms of terrain and get in your face and cause you to have a pretty bad time. Yeah, it's even faster than the... it's just swift. I'll just leave it at that. It's not the bravest creature. It's more likely to break and retreat, to go back to spitting at you or trying to find allies to roam around it, instead of just taking you head on. Because it has another thing, because I bet you didn't think that because it's a big dinosaur and it spits horrible Carnosaur level acid and it has poison melee attacks, that it's actually... You didn't think it was a buff wagon, and you're wrong. It's totally a buff wagon. The Troglodon has this ability called Primeval Roar. And what it does is it basically lets out this horrifying, undulating noise that just absolutely, like, is spooky for the enemy to hear. But the thing is that all of the Lizardmen, thanks to Tenenhuan's Cult of Sotek, interpret it as this... It's an eerie call that, like, reaches down into their beliefs and convinces them that, like, the old ones are with them, and it brings out their inner savagery, and it makes Lizardmen terrifying. Well, Saurus specifically. And so Primeval Roar basically made it so that Saurus, Kroxgiors, Old Bloods, Scarvets, everyone with that predatory fighter rule, which gave them Rampage, which is like, so Cold Riders, Saurus Warriors, and Kroxgiors are the big ones. It gave all those units a huge buff on top of all of their other stuff. So the Troglodon would... So the main way it plays is it hangs out in the middle of all your Saurus and Kroxgiors and stuff, spits this very long-range acid at people to do tons of damage to them, especially large targets. Does a bunch of damage to them, starts slowing them down, wounding them, and if it hits you, it gets a buff to do damage against you. So I would guess its ranged attacks would be anti-large, poisonous, and they would provide like a melee defense debuff or like an armor debuff, as, you know, the corrosive venom eats away at you and you start screaming, which allows the Troglodon to run forward and take advantage and start swinging at you. Because it was literally kind of a 1-2 punch creature. It was literally that if it had hit you with its poisonous spit, it would be able to, like, combo its attacks onto you much easier. But on top of that, it has poison melee attacks. It's very heavily armored, just as heavily armored as a Carnosaur, if not more so. Very quick, aquatic. It has that skink on its back who's an arcane vassal, so you can cast fireballs. He can bring more winds of magic in with the divining rod. And then it has Primeval Roar, which buffs all local Saurus and Kroxgiors and Cold Riders. Which, the way I would interpret Primeval Roar would be, I would have that be a local buff that goes, an active local buff once per battle, just like it is in Tabletop. It was once per battle. Primeval Roar should be a once per battle buff where the Troglodon would scream, and it should cause all units around it that have the Rampage rule to immediately Rampage, but give them like a huge melee attack buff, like plus 12, or, something like that. So something that would just allow them to just go crazy. And the Troglodon is one of the monsters I am the most excited for to see in the game. I just don't see him being in this DLC. I just have a feeling. Just because, like we did get the Charybdis for the Dark Elves, but it was a free LC, and I feel like because of how long it took, I really genuinely feel like the Charybdis was a response to the community being like, we don't feel like we got enough through the Queen and the Crone, and it wasn't something that was initially planned. And I felt that a lot of people felt that because it took like a month to get it, So I really hope the Troglodon, like, I would be thrilled if the Troglodon was in, but, I hope it's either in or it's not and is for future sale. I don't want it to be like one of those things where, like, they release the DLC and then everyone's like, oh, this sucks, like we were with Queen and the Crone, and they were like, oh, sorry, here's a monster, and they give us the Troglodon. I would really rather that not be the case. But I do have a bad feeling CA is going to be like, oh, look, here's a new Bastiladon, and here's a new Stegodon. There, we gave you monsters. And I feel like a lot of people are going to feel cheated by that. Hopefully that's not the case. Would love to see the Troglodon. Would love to play with the Troglodon. I'm not expecting it, because I just think it's a lot of work for a model that... And it seems like the recent DLCs for Lord packs have been almost exclusively avoiding difficult to do models. So we'll have to see what happens. In any event, that does on the Troglodon. Let's move on to some of the more interesting options that you may not be aware of. I know one of them everyone's talking about, and we'll get to it. So let's move on. The next unit that I, once again, would really like to see in the game, but don't feel like it's going to happen yet, are Razordons. Like kind of like how pterodons and riperdactyls are the same model. They just have like different heads and coloration and stuff. So, pterodons and riperdactyls are both flying dinosaurs, but riperdactyls have piranha heads in our melee focus unit. Pterodons have pterodon heads in our range focus unit that drop boulders on people. The Razordons and salamanders have a very similar relationship. Salamanders are more aquatic looking thanks to all of their fins, and they have a much more, they have like a red and black aesthetic and they shoot fire. Whereas Razordons are more, as you'll see here, kind of more of like a gray and dark gray and purple almost aesthetic that have a bunch of spikes all over them. And what they do is that when they get agitated by skinks poking them in the sides, instead of shooting fire, they basically raise up their backs and they have a muscle spasm that causes all those spikes in their back and their tails to just launch forward in this huge spray and pray method that just like destroys everybody. And it's just super dangerous and deadly. There are these armor-piercing missiles that'll just ruin your day, and it's just like rapid fire. It's pretty short range, but it's just a lot of bullets, essentially. It's kind of like the Lizardman's answer to a Rattling gun. I'm not expecting to see them in because, once again, they seem like a unit that is going to take a lot of work to get from the Salamander being point A to the Razordon being point B, and that's okay with me. I mean, they don't feel like a unit that's super integral to the Lizardman line, and while I think they'll add a lot of really interesting gameplay and tactics to Lizardman players on top of being just a really cool unit aesthetically, they're not a unit I'm in a huge rush to get my hands on. But if we do see them in this DLC, the way I quite frankly would expect them to work is just kind of a short to medium range rapid fire unit. A unit that would run up and I would hope it would have like a passive buff that we see on some missile units. Like the Hell Cannon for Regiment of Renown, I think has a passive where if it like shoots enough times, it starts rapid firing. I'd love to see the Razordons have a passive buff because the way they worked is that if enemies got within half range, they would shoot like twice as many shots. So what I would like to see with the Razordons is that like they would have a range, but if you got within a certain distance of them, they would go into overdrive mode and their reload rate would get like really, really fast, or their reload skill, and they would just start rapid firing like crazy. And basically, I would just expect it to be not super accurate, but just a ton of shots. Missile fire that's pretty heavily armor piercing and would just be really good for skewering units, especially if they didn't have shields. I see it being a small arms fire kind of attack, so that if you had shields, you could mitigate the damage pretty well. But if you were just relying on armor to save you, I feel like they're a unit that would actually do really well in that fight. But just like salamanders, they're pretty good at fighting in close combat. They have decent save. They're aquatic. They're just as fast as skinks and salamanders. So they're they're another skirmishing war beast that has ranged attacks. So I'm very excited to see them one day. I feel very, very genuinely compelled to say that I feel like CA is going to give us all of our units eventually. It's just kind of a matter of time. But the Razordons are not, like I said, they're pretty low on my list of things that I'm expecting to see like soon. So with that, let's keep trucking forward. So the next two units I'm going to do together because they're functionally the same thing. They're just slightly different. So something that we've been seeing from CA, especially with DLCs, has been this kind of interesting habit of them basically taking a unit champion from 8th edition and making it into its completely unique own unit. So like Nasty Skulkers were, a couple of like little hero models you could basically upgrade from a goblin unit made into their own standalone unit. Same thing for Aspiring Champions. Same thing for Marauder Horsemasters, which were originally unit champions. That's been kind of a repeating theme in a ton of the armies in Total War Warhammer. And I don't think that is a trend that's ending anytime soon. So I kind of looked through the Lizardman book and thought for a bit about which unit champions would make any form of sense as a like standalone unit as opposed to just being like an upgrade or whatever. And the two that I came up with were Kroxgior Ancients and Revered Guardians. So Kroxgior Ancients are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They are Kroxgiors that are much older than their kin. And in Kroxgiors, just like most Lizardmen, as they get older, they get bulkier and their scales get harder, and Kroxgiors actually get bigger. And they turn into these hulking colossi, super scary guys that are just, they hit like trucks. And they're very, very spooky, even compared to regular Kroxgiors. You know, Nakai the Wanderer is the oldest living Kroxgor, and he is so big, I think he's more akin to being a monster at this point than monstrous infantry. And he is almost like a demigod, just due to his age. Like, the Lizardmen aren't sure that he's mortal. He's so powerful. So, like, a unit, like a new unit of Kroxgiors that maybe was very, very heavily armored and had a much better stat line, it was like Kroxgor Ancients. And, you know, maybe they could even give them, like, charged weapons of the old ones, and they could have magic attacks, because that seems to kind of be a theme of when they add in, like, super elite units. They're like, you have magic attacks now. We're done. Let's get out of here. So that's a unit I could see being potentially interesting, though it's in my unlikely category. And the other one are the Revered Guardians, which are just supercharged Temple Guard. Now, Revered Guardians could be a little bit different, because some Revered Guardians carried a single weapon, or like a hand weapon that they hit really hard with, and then a shield, or they had magic weapons, actually is what you would do. So like you could take a unit of Temple Guard, but the unit champion could take a magic weapon as if he were a character, which was super rare. Very few armies could do that. Most people didn't do anything with it because it was just points that most people didn't want to bother spending on a champion. But that could be kind of a cool concept, would be like if you had Revered Guardians, maybe they, instead of being like Temple Guard, which are like a big halberd armor-piercing unit, you can instead give them like magic attacks for their magic weapons, and they have hand weapons, but they have really high AP, and maybe they have like the Guardian trait, so they, you know, provide the Guardian ability to nearby characters, and maybe just like Aspiring Champions, there's only a small group of them, like maybe 20 or 30 of them, instead of it being like a whole unit of like 45 or 60 or whatever. So those are the two units that I could kind of see having champion forms done. But once again, pretty heavy in my unlikely category. I'd rather see completely new units than kind of invented new units, but these would be easy to do while still providing a unique niche into the Lizardmen battle line, so I wouldn't say no to them. So, you know, just kind of an idea there. Let's go ahead and move on to the final unit in this category. The final unit we're going to be looking at is what I could not describe as anything other than a fan favorite. The Dread Saurian. So for those unaware, the Dread Saurian is the uber monster of the Lizardmen next to like the Thunder Lizard. But where the Thunder Lizard are these colossal monsters who just by like being wild can destroy a temple city, or at least a notable portion of a temple city, the Dread Saurians are the things that hunt Thunder Lizards, and they are Carnosaurs that are much, much bigger and are on cocaine. So Dread Saurians are thankfully very, very rare in Lustria, and on top of being very rare, the Lizardmen have located all of them and have basically covered them in very potent artifacts of the old ones to essentially dominate them and also augment them, so that they're these kind of living avatars of the old ones. And they could come with a series of upgrades, but if they were to be put into the game, which if you had asked me before the Vampire Coast came out, I would have said no, absolutely no way Dread Saurians are happening. Not in a million years, not happening. But then we got the Vampire Coast. And the Dread Saurian comes from a supplemental book known as the Monstrous Arcanum. Well, you know what else comes from the Monstrous Arcanum? Necrofix Colossi, Morngulls, Skin Wolves from Norska, Thimir, like a ton of units that I would have said, no way, not in a million years, are going to be in Total War Warhammer, are now in the game. A bunch of them. So the Monstrous Arcanum and the Storm of Magic supplements seem like they're totally fair game for new units. So that means the Dread Saurian is quite frankly on the table as a possible unit. So what would the Dread Saurian look like? Well, basically it would be a very big dinosaur. Like, it dwarfs Carnosaurs. And it should be the ultimate anti-large predator. They don't have riders because they're too big for that, and there's nobody that would be stupid enough to try and ride one. And they are these monstrous denizens that are very, very heavily armored, thanks to having actual golden armor put on them by the Lizardmen and having heavy scales. They're insanely fast despite their size, and they are the ultimate predator. Like, the Carnosaurs made dragons go extinct on the continent of Lestria, and the Carnosaurs are a joke compared to the Dread Saurian. It is a horrifying monster, and it hits insanely hard. On top of that, it can come with some pretty unique upgrades that make it even more terrifying. For instance, basically each one of the famous old ones has artifacts left behind, and any/all of these artifacts can be equipped onto a Dread Saurian to make it more powerful. Things like if it has the artifact that gives it the Blessing of Sotek, that when it charges, it bursts into flame and will incinerate everyone it charges into. So imagine whenever it started its charge animation, it just became like a blazing comet of reptilian anger and caused fire damage, as well as having a massive charge bonus. Or it could have the Blessing of Hanchi, which made him practically invisible, so that he would have stalk, so you wouldn't be able to see him until he was really close, which is fucking terrifying to imagine, especially in a live action game. And even if you could see him, he has very, very high missile resistance, just like the Fimir. So imagine like a colossal, bigger than a Carnosaur monster running around who's not only stalking, so you can't see him until he's close, but he also has like 25% missile resistance or something fucking ridiculous like that. On top of that, because we're just going to keep going, he can have the Blessing of Tlaxcodol, which if he has that, it makes him, basically, he gets immune to psychology, so he doesn't give a shit about anything. He gets a bigger leadership bonus, and it slows his movement speed a little bit, but it literally makes him unbreakable. He's functionally unbreakable, so he would be unbreakable. And you could give him other things, like the Blessing of Quetzal, which made his armor even tougher, and it had made him insanely tough. So his armor would go up to like 150, 160. You know, just like the buffs this creature can have are horrifying. The most powerful one, though, was the Blessing of Tepok, which, if he had the Blessing of Tepok, made him ethereal. Ethereal! So not only is it a giant Carnosaur on steroids who is ready to fucking ruin your day and eat your face off, it's a fucking ghost dinosaur that dwarfs a Carnosaur and is ready to eat your face off. And you could combine all of those things if you wanted to, so you could have a ethereal ghost dinosaur who's invisible at long distance, practically immune to missile weapons, even though he's a ghost, so that would mean missile weapons would have to be magical to do any substantial damage. Plus, he bursts into flame when he charges you, his armor is so thick that it's on par with the steam tanks, and he might be a little slower than he normally would be, but he's unbreakable. Like, what the fuck? You want to fight that thing? I don't want to fight that thing. So, obviously, if CA puts him in the game, I don't think they'll give him any of his upgrades, because that would just be suicide. But who knows? You know, the Necrofex Colossus in Tabletop was a very powerful monster, but it was a melee monster. It didn't have even the option to upgrade with frickin' cannon Gatling arms. And now we have a flamethrower version and a cannon version. So, who knows what they're going to do. Those mad lads over there. But that's the Dread Saurian. I would have said 6 months ago that it was impossible, but I have given up on that. I'm pretty sure we're going to get him eventually. Even though I think it's kind of unnecessary, but, you know, here we are. So if you're looking forward to that, enjoy letting that bask in your mind, that bullshittery of dinosaurness. So that's it for the new units tab entirely. So now let's kind of talk about potential like rights and a little bit of campaign chat. So a theory that I've become more okay with as time has passed, even though initially I was kind of like, was that the Lizardmen might be the Game 2 equivalent to Bretonnia, and that we might see a campaign mechanic relating to a character. And the popular theory, which I am now endorsing, seems to be that through some campaign mechanic, I don't think it'll be a right, I think it'll be like a free LC update to the Lizardmen factions, will be that if you accomplish some kind of goal, you'll be able to summon Lord Kroak. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, Lord Kroak does not make a lot of sense as a lord. He is an unbreakable, floating dead guy who doesn't talk at all. Like, he can't talk. But he's this floating corpse that the Lizardmen only bring out when they are incredibly desperate. They only bring Lord Kroak out if it is like the 12th hour and shit's getting real. But when they do bring him out, he's functionally a living nuke. He basically walks onto the battlefield, or he floats onto the battlefield. He's unbreakable. He's incredibly resistant to all forms of missile fire and melee attack. So he basically like would reduce your melee attack by at least 9, if not like more than that. And he also would have very high missile resistance. And he would just laugh silently as a ghost as you attempt to attack him and do absolutely nothing while he just explodes death on everyone around him. I don't know how he would functionally work. Like, I don't know if it would be like a timed pulse where every 10 to 15 seconds he literally pulses and does damage to all local enemies. I don't know if it would be like a Mortis Engine effect where he just floats into combat, starts doing tons of damage. I don't know if it would be an active, kind of like we talked about with the Engine of the Gods. But I would love to see him in the game as like a summonable character who could, be equipped to your armies to help out. I don't think it should be relic priests, like a bunch of them. I think it should just be Lord Kroak. Because to me, he doesn't really make a lot of sense as a standalone legendary lord. He makes sense as an auxiliary or a support character. Just because, he can't talk. He's kind of this, and he's so strong. Lord Kroak is hands down the strongest character in Warhammer Fantasy. There is nobody who even comes close to Lord Kroak. Like, Krakenrock the Black, get that shit out of here. Sigmar Heldenhammer, you wish. Nagash, what a fucking joke. Like, Kroak is the strongest, most terrifying motherfucker in Warhammer Fantasy. Just because his feats, even as a floating corpse, are just mind-boggling and lore-breaking. Like, not in a true sense, but like, he has done things that just make everything else that came after him just look like child's play. Even Mazda Mundi, is a pupil to Lord Kroak and can never truly amount to what Lord Kroak is and was capable of. He's supposedly just an echo of his former strength, but he still does absolutely ridiculous things when he is brought out or decides to do something. He's still active in the world, because when he died, it wasn't like he had an artifact or a spell or anything that saved him. He just was like, no, I don't feel like dying. Fuck that. Like, I refuse to die. And he just decided, nope, I'm staying here, and continued to be a monstrous badass until the end of the world. And he's just insane. So that's kind of the main thing I'm looking for with the Lizardmen, or I'm expecting, would like to see, is like Relic Priest / Lord Kroak support character. As far as Tenenhuan is concerned, with like his unique right, honestly, I would just kind of like to see him have like a Jungle Swarm related thing. Like the Rite of Sotek kind of does that, in that it provides like attrition, as it represents like the flora and fauna of the jungle turning against invaders. But I would like it to kind of be something a little more dramatic and like a bigger buff. Like, maybe it gives his entire army, maybe it gives like all of your armies in your territory poisoned attacks in campaign, or it gives like all of your generals like an active ability, or it gives you an army ability that like does a bunch of poison damage, like the Tomb Swarm, but instead of just doing hardcore damage, it does like poison debuffs and all sorts of other crazy shit. And like a bunch of serpents swarm over everything, because Tenenhuan is deeply intrinsically tied to jungle swarms. Like, that's his thing. So I'm really hoping his unique right has something to do with that, or has something to do with just sacrificing shitloads of Skaven. Either one of those would be great. But that's pretty much it for that. Let's go ahead and jump into the final section of this video, which is going to be proposed Regiments of Renown. Alright, so Regiments of Renown. I'm going to be honest, I was not going to do this section, but it's been a very heavily requested topic, so I'm going to take a whack at it. But I don't feel good about these guesses, because CA's criteria for what makes a Regiment of Renown is so nonsensical and random from a distance that it's pointless and stupid to even try and predict what they're going to be, in my opinion. Just because every single time CA's done a Lord pack, their criteria for like what will be a Regiment of Renown and what won't has been like fucking impossible to predict. The very first DLC we had with Regiments of Renown, Grim in the Grave, took a expansion, Sigmar's Blood, and was like, hey, there's 8 units to both sides. Bam, they're Regiments of Renown. Then we got the King and the Warlord, and they brought some characters out of army books and some characters out of the end times, and then they made some up. Even though there were like some perfectly good options from like scattered around the Warhammer world. You know, a lot of people were like, oh, dwarves, like maybe we'll get like the Everguard, like the hammers that are Thorgrim Grudgebearer's personal guys. Nope, it was all like sort of Carragate Peak themed, but not really. And, you know, and then for the greenskins, it was like goblins. Infinite goblins, you know, so. And then Queen of the Crone came out, and it was, once again, kind of a bizarre mix of, like, units that were in the army book, and then some units that just kind of fell out of the fucking sky. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First unit I'm going to be looking at for a potential Regiment of Renown is the Eternity Guardians. So the Eternity Guardians are Lord Kroak's personal bodyguard. And who or what they are exactly has changed a little bit from edition to edition. In 7th edition, I believe it was, the Eternity Guardians were literally a cohort of undead Temple Guard that, like, they were just like skin and bone. They were mummified Temple Guard, essentially, that had, they were the, so, hold on. When Lord Kroak died, he died on a plateau behind something called the Bridge of Stars, which was like this super high up bridge in Itza that led to where he was casting his super spells and trying to fight off the demonic incursion. And there were 1,000 Temple Guard on the Bridge of Stars. And they fought to a man, defending Lord Mazdamundi as long as they could. And they defended it, or Mazdamundi, Kroak, for as long as they could. And they did a fucking great job. But eventually they all died. And Lord Kroak died immediately afterwards, and then he cast the Deliverance of Itza and purged all the demons. So the Eternity Guardians are one of two things. Either they are the undead corpses of those original 1,000 Temple Guard who have been reanimated and they follow Kroak around, and their whole thing is they're just unbreakable Temple Guard, which would be super fucking powerful. So they're just, that would be the Regiment of Renown thing. Unbreakable Temple Guard. And they could either be the undead variant, or they could be the more 8th edition variant, which is more that when Temple Guard die, their helmets are typically taken, those like Triceratops looking helms, and they pass them on to the next generation that comes out of the spawning pools. And when Temple Guard put on those helmets, it basically gives them some of the knowledge and skills of all the previous bearers of that helmet. So the Eternity Guardians could also just be a modern generation of powerful Temple Guard who have had the original Eternity Guardians equipment passed down to them, and so they retain kind of that sense. But basically, unbreakable Temple Guard. Next up is a potential monstrous Regiment of Renown, who is Tinslotty, the Oracle of Kroak. So in most of these DLCs, we've gotten a single entity Regiment of Renown, like the Ragnarok Queen, or one of whatever the mammoth one is, Soul Crusher, and the Chill, whatever his name is, the Hydra. You know what I'm talking about. So for the Lizardmen one, the one that I offer up is Tinslotty, the Oracle of Lord Kroak. But this would require him to be a Troglodon. Tinslotty is literally Kroak's like eyes and ears into the world, and is kind of his voice and his representative in a lot of situations. And originally he was a Pterodon Rider character, but when they invented the Troglodons, the skink oracles were literally based on Tinslotty. So I think the Oracle of Kroak would make a very, very cool Regiment of Renown. But obviously that would be totally dependent on if he could be in the game, because that would require Troglodons to be a basic unit. But if he were in the game, my suggestion for his uniqueness, beyond just being, you know, rank 9, really, really skilled, is I would have, since he's Kroak's Oracle instead of just a generic one, I would recommend, if for his Arcane Vassal Bound spell, instead of having like Fireball, I would just give him a way more powerful spell. That would be kind of like his cool gimmick, is that he'd have a better stat line, but instead of like Fireball, he'd have, I don't know, maybe if Lord Kroak's in the game, he would have like the Deliverance of Itza, or something that is just really strong. You know, not Banishment, something unique, but, you know, something that would allow you to just really fucking punch somebody in the face. I think that would be kind of a cool gimmick. So there's my idea there. So stepping away from Lord Kroak and getting into some of the ones I actually feel kind of good about is probably one of my favorite ones, which is the Sky Cohort. The Sky Cohort is Tic-Tac-Toe's personal Pterodon Rider bodyguard. So Tic-Tac-Toe, for those of you unaware, which yes, I know his name is ridiculous, he is this super badass skink chief, and he's the master of skies for the Temple City of Hexadol. And Tic-Tac-Toe is he's like a super badass melee fighter who leads like super fast vanguard ambush battles in the skies, and he's a super cool character in the lore. But his bodyguard, who is known as the Sky Cohort, they ride the same type of Pterodon he does, which is a Pterodon from a very specific cliffside in Lustria, and these Pterodons are noted for having a lime green coloration. So the way I would represent the Sky Cohort as a Regiment of Renown, beyond, just being rank 9 Pterodon riders, is that I would have them being like the super ambushers that they are. I would have them be better in melee combat to represent Tic-Tac-Toe's ability as a flying combatant. And I would also have them have a much higher speed stat. So I would just have them be super fast, probably have more ammunition, and have notably better melee stats. That would be my recommendation for them, because most Pterodons already have like Vanguard deployment and stuff, so there's nothing new you could really add in from that perspective, which is what they did in Tabletop, is that they were ambushers, whereas most Pterodons weren't. Or alternatively, they could be Pterodon riders with stalk instead of just ambush, which that would be pretty cool and unique. So there's kind of my idea there. So that's the Sky Cohort. Let's keep moving. Keeping things up in the sky, next we have the Wind That Hungers. So just to be clear, we're kind of stepping into the end times at this point and away from like traditionally famous units. So the Wind That Hungers are a group of super extra violent Ripperdactyls. And what kind of makes them unique from a Lizardman perspective is not only are they much more violent than your typical Ripperdactyls, but instead of having traditional skink riders, they have red-crested skink riders. So they're kind of like a Sotek empowered unit of Ripperdactyl riders. And pretty much my only suggestion for this unit would just be to give them much, much better melee stats for like melee attack and melee defense to represent them having the improved skink, red-crested skink riders instead of just regular skink melee fighters. The only other thing I could maybe add on top of that would be to give them poisoned attacks to really push them into Regiment of Renown territory, because Sotek's, all about that poison. And a Ripperdactyl unit with poison attacks would be really, really fucking scary. So that's kind of the best thing I can think of right now for the Wind That Hungers, unless they had some kind of unique additional ability, but that had to be something a little more outlandish. So, alright. For Tenenwan's favorite unit, I would assume, we have the Red Shields, which are basically just a unit of red-crested skink cohorts that have these really famous shields that they got off of a really special dinosaur that they found. That was kind of, it was this, I think it was a Pleiodon, I don't quite remember, but it was this super big dinosaur, and they tore off a bunch of its scales and made them into these colossal shields. So they basically have really big shields that are like super red, and they're notoriously tough for being skinks. So for them, I would just have a skink cohort. They'd probably be one of the cheaper Regiments of Renown, but I would just have a unit of red-crested skink cohorts that just had maybe a higher chevron of shield. So instead of having bronze shields, have silver shields. And I would also have them have improved armor and melee defense. Basically just a skink unit that's designed to just be super tanky and actually be kind of survivable, which would be really, really powerful on such a fast-moving, skirmish-focused unit, which I guess I would probably make them red-crested skinks with javelins to make them more effective as a Regiment of Renown, but, you could go either way. You could either keep them super cheap as just regular cohorts, or make them a tad bit more expensive, but get them those super awesome poison shooting attacks for a little bit more price. Curious what y'all think about that one, but the Red Shields are probably one of my favorites. They have a fun showing in the end times, and they're kind of the most intrinsically linked to Tenenwan, even though most of these units are from his legendary Red Host. So, stepping into a fiery corner, we've got the Fire Lizards. I know, not the best name, but the Lizardmen tend to be very literal when giving names to their elite units. The Fire Lizards were a group of salamanders who were known for being very bloodthirsty and ferocious, even for their kind. And according to myth, when they breathe fire, it always takes the shape of a serpent to show that they're blessed by Sotek before landing on the foes and immolating and, tearing them apart. But the thing about the salamanders of the Fire Lizards is that they were more notorious for their combat antics, as they had a tendency to burn Skaven alive and then charge in and rip their bodies to shreds even as they were turning to charcoal, because they just fucking hated Skaven. I think the best way to represent that would maybe have them be a salamander unit that maybe has a slightly different ranged attack. So instead of the typical flamethrower attack, maybe it could be more of a short range shotgun effect, as they spit out kind of a more close combat oriented version, and then give them frenzy to represent their bloodthirsty status, and just make them into a more melee oriented unit. This is supposed to run in shotgun effect for the leadership damage of the burnt leadership debuff, and then they charge in with their fear and superior combat stats and frenzy and just tear people up. So I think that would be a really cool way to kind of change them from just being kind of a more generic shooty skirmish unit that can fight to being one that's more angled about fighting and causing serious leadership disruption. Once again, shooting in the dark, but it's fun. Now looking at another potentially monstrous option, we have the Living Bastion. Technically Living Bastions, because there's more than one, but for Regiment of Renown's sake, I'm going to pretend there's just one. And the Living Bastion is basically a Ark of Sotek, so a Bastildon with the Ark of Sotek on its back. They are notoriously loyal and very, very stubborn on the battlefield. And despite being, dinosaurs that were, are traditionally kind of dumb and not really caring of their surroundings, one of the things that was really famous about them is that whenever Tenenhuan would pass by them, the Living Bastions would always bow, because they recognized him as an avatar of a god that they either, I wouldn't say served, but that they revered. They recognized Tenenhuan as this incredibly powerful, unique individual, and they were super loyal and tanky, even for Bastildons. So my recommendation for them, on top of just being Ark of Sotek type Bastildons, would be to either make them unbreakable, or basically just give them improved, significantly improved leadership, and maybe give them the Rally aura, or the Encourage aura, so that they provide leadership buffs to nearby allies while they're in there fighting and providing that poison buff. That could be a really cool way to kind of show their heightened intelligence and extreme loyalty, even in the face of imminent doom. So that's kind of a cool idea I had for that. Hope y'all like that one. We've got 3 more to go. Alright, another one I have up on the list here is the Eyes of the Canopy. So these are a group of chameleon skinks that can make for kind of an interesting Regiment of Renown. They had a very unique coloration, in that they were kind of brighter oranges and had really bizarre colors, and they used bizarre frogs to poison their darts. And it's because they came from somewhere else. They came from a mysterious other, either distant part of Lustria or distant part of the world. They might have come from the Southlands, or who knows, maybe even the Dragon Isles, or further afield. But basically they showed up to fight alongside Tenenhuan, and they acted as guides, and they were just very, very scary chameleon skinks. Now, it's kind of hard to think of what to do to make chameleon skinks more dangerous. They're already a pretty potent unit. The only thing I can think of is maybe improved movement speed, maybe improved combat stats. I could maybe see physical resistance, or perhaps they do the Discourage aura when they hit, due to having a really nasty form of poison or something. It's kind of hard to think of anything really meaningful. I kind of just put them on the list because I was just looking at any units that would be interesting and were different from each other, and it was oh, well, there's a chameleon skink option, and that's technically an option, so I guess I'll include them on here. These ones I probably feel the least confident about, because I can't really think of anything super cool to add to chameleon skinks. So that's just my opinion on that. Let's keep moving. Now, finally taking a unit at some just good old-fashioned Saurus warriors, we have the very, very cool named Cohort of the Black Club. And basically, these are some of the oldest, most powerful Saurus warriors alive. The cohort of the Black Club was one of the very first spawnings of Saurus to ever exist. And while those exact Saurus have passed away, their regiment, like their banner and their line, has been continued on over the course of eons. And they are literally the oldest group of Saurus that is on record and is still fighting and alive. Plus, black coloration lizardmen are like my shit. Like, I love the look of dark colored lizardmen. So I would love to have these guys as just like a really powerful Saurus warrior unit. You know, Saurus warriors that just had like a really beastly stat line. I don't even think they would need like a super cool ability. Like, maybe you could give them the encourage aura, or maybe they could cause fear, or perhaps they could just, who knows, have some kind of unique, interesting buff to represent themselves as like Ancients of Warfare. But they are a very slick looking unit, and I would love to see them represented well and give us like a good Saurus warrior Regiment of Renown. So let's move on to the final Regiment of Renown. Alright, the final unit I'll be looking at today is the Honor Guard of Hexadol. These guys are pretty straightforward. They're another Temple Guard Regiment of Renown option, but unlike the Eternity Guardians, instead of just being like a flat unbreakable unit, these are basically Temple Guard they are the oldest living Temple Guard in all of Lustria, or the world, to be quite frank. So these are like stalwart, ancient Temple Guard who have been around for a long time and have gotten incredibly powerful. And one of the kind of unique things about them is that they're very heavily armored and wield very powerful weapons, but they're actually very quick. Because one of the things that they do is that their entire job, their only reason for existence, is to protect Lord Mazdamundi. And because he constantly gets on top of his frickin' Stegodon Zlak, they've basically had to get good at jogging very, very fast so that they can just keep up with him while he's on that stupid Stegodon. So I think for the Honor Guard of Hexadol, it'd be cool to see them maybe have the Guardian trait and maybe just increase speed. That would basically allow them to not keep up with Zlak, but at least kind of bridge the gap between slow Saurus infantry and a big ol' honkin' Stegodon. Only other thing I could see for them would just be improved armor to represent that, the fact that they were like decked out, even for Temple Guard. So that wraps up the last Regiment of Renown. So let's do some closing thoughts, and yeah. Alright everyone, well that's going to wrap up my predictions and thoughts video on the upcoming Lizardmen half of the Lizardmen Skaven DLC. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, you want to see more videos like this in the future, then be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and, you know, leave your thoughts. I'd love to see what y'all think about my ideas. Are there any units that I left out? Do you think some of the way I arranged them was wrong? You know, do you think that the Troglodon is very, very likely? Do you think that the red-crested skink should be a Regiment of Renown? You know, I'd love to hear all your thoughts. But I will be back with the Skaven half of this video in just a couple days, because I want to make sure to get out all of my thoughts and opinions before CA makes any announcement on the Skaven versus Lizardmen DLC. And we know it's coming before May, so they need to announce it pretty soon, because they usually announce it like 2 weeks before, give or take, and it has to be out before the end of May. But it can't just be before the end of May, because they're not going to release it back to back with Three Kingdoms. That would be stupid, because then you'd have competing sales. It'd be better to release it like at the end of April, or like the very first couple days of May. So hopefully we'll be getting an announcement trailer sometime in March, or at least start getting teasers for it sometime in March. I'm not super expecting a full announcement trailer until good old April, but you know, fingers crossed, we'll hope for the best. In any event, thank you all for watching, and yeah, that's gonna do it for today. I'm gonna go drink some water because my throat hurts. Take care. Be back with more stuff as time continues to turn and jazz. I'm gonna stop talking. Bye.